As Mark has said, if you have a vision for a right relationship, then you realize that what you're working towards is some kind of partnering, some kind of being together that I often refer to as kind of ethical partnering. Because you can be together and not be in a good relationship with each other. So it's really to build the optimal or the more ideal type of relationship. But to do that, you have to be very conscious of what the ingredients are that makes it possible for services and for people that rely on services to be in this ethical kind of partnering kind of framework. And so some of the signs of that are whether, as Margaret, you could tell from her comments, whether people are being truthful with each other. It's very hard to have an honorable relationship when people won't say what they mean, and or if they say things that are inaccurate or they mislead or deceive. Most people wouldn't think of an ethical relationship as a deceptive relationship. And so in this sense, when both sides are trying to be truthful, then they will, of course, have their shortcomings, but the authenticity is related to the truthfulness. And to the extent that people are truthful, one would be able to at least know where you stood with each other. And that's very important, because if you don't know where you stand with each other, you don't trust each other. And so the testing of that is whether people are found out to be not truthful in some way. And so when you find people not being truthful with you, your guard goes up, and you're less trusting, you're more suspicious, and you're more defensive, and so on. So being truthful, even if you don't like what they're saying, is still better. At least you know exactly where they stand, and they think you're obstinately wrong, but they're at least articulating that to you, and they're being truthful, even if they are, of course, misguided. I mean, how could they not think we were right, you know? And so part of this is in transparency, that you know what the other party's agenda is, and when you're always having to guess what people's agendas are, it makes it very difficult to relate, because something is hidden from view, it's not there where you can deal with it, and so in that way, it impairs relationship, and it also undermines relationship. Whereas transparency, where things are what they seem to be, helps relationship, because people are not always having to read between the lines, search behind the words, and to look for something that may not actually be there. Thirdly, you can't have a relationship without dialogue. And so when the talking stops, the relationship stops for all practical purposes. You have to stay in dialogue, because from one day to the next, a lot happens. And if you're not in dialogue with each other, then the thread is broken. And in this sense, you can see in Mark's example of the monthly meeting, it's an intentional vehicle to have the necessary dialogue between all the parties. If they aren't talking, or they haven't talked in months or years, you can well imagine how they can get off the rails. But where there are opportunities regularly for dialogue, and everybody realizes if we don't have these opportunities, we won't be connected, we won't be in touch, we won't be able to kind of be on the same team. So the dialogue and the provision for it is very facilitated. And it's always good that the walk and the talk line up, that you honor your promises, you do what you say you're going to do, and if you can't do it or you fail to do it, that you acknowledge that, because confidence in each other is built by the consistency of the conduct. And when the conduct is almost in a sense where you can get to a point where you don't have to worry about it, because they've always been on time, they've always kept their word, and if they haven't, they've always let you know. When you have that kind of platform that you've built, then you have something that is a kind of an asset of the relationship, something that can be a kind of anchor for it. But where people will break their word and not do what they're going to do, then that's corrosive of the relationship. A good example of this is where bureaucracies will often say, well, we'll get right back to you on that. And then someone does finally get to you 3 months later, right back to you, I should say, 3 months later, and then they don't apologize. Why? Because they don't need to. You only apologize to people that matter, and you only apologize if you have to. Because after all, this family or this client's ruining a perfectly good program simply by needing something from us, and they're kind of a pest and an annoyance. They've ruined a perfectly good day. But we are here to help ourselves. I mean the others, sorry. I get so confused. I mean, what's in it for me? Isn't that what partnership is? Honoring the promises really goes a long way towards a kind of confidence. And of course, in the positive side of that, everything becomes easier when people trust each other. Just a lot of problems just never happen because it's just there's no space for it. So a lot of the hassles come because something has been avoided, something has not been dealt with. Now, if you think we're talking about your marriage, that may be true. But you're extrapolating. So when both parties are engaged with the real issues, then the real issues get dealt with. Because people are trying to name what is the real issue. They're trying to get to the bottom of the real issue. And as long as people are doing that, there's a very good chance that they will get there, because they're trying to work their way to the kind of crux of things. And of course, whether you're a staff person or whether you're a bureaucrat or whether you're a family or a service user, everybody fails. Everybody stuffs something up. They really aren't good people, they're just people. In this sense, no one has the corner on excellence or being right, though we're normally quite suspicious that we are right and the others aren't. That's a kind of a priori premise that we all have. If people could just think like I do, how much better things would be. But that's what psychologists would call delusional thinking. It's certainly not the case. So we just need to see that we do have limitations and failings. It's never one-sided. But we talk about things in one-sided ways because it flatters us. But it's really, we all contribute to some extent to some of these kinds of situations. And one of the issues that will come up is what people often refer to as power, or in institutional or organizational context we'd call authority, and being very clear about how power is used and the legitimate uses of power and the illegitimate uses of power makes it possible to partner, because power is now transparent. It's clear who has the authority to do what, who gave them that authority, who didn't, all those sorts of things. And so you have to be realistic about power as an issue to be managed. And human beings have great difficulty with the issue of power. Of course, there are things that you can do by way of setting up power so that it can be shared. But to do that, you really need a relationship in which power can be shared. And part of that relationship is defining how power is to be used and how it is not to be abused. And so you have to kind of spell out what that is. And the clearer that is, the less chance that you're going to have difficulty. Now, we're moving into an era in the human services where service users and families have insisted that they be returned to them the power that was taken away from them by the way services were set up. And services have dispossessed and disempowered people. It's simply not a matter of changing the rules of human services and installing self-direction. It's really defining what we mean by that in clear terms. Otherwise, we have expectations of a shift in power, but not clarity about what that shift looks like when it's completed or done well, that sort of thing. Now, it is quite possible to be clearer, and so that's what's being called for. If you're going to have right relationship, you don't want to have right relationship with people that are dubious. So part of it is, it goes back to the very kinds of people you'd like to partner with. And in this sense, what kinds of agencies you would like to partner with. And in many cases, families just simply do not trust some of the mainstream systems and services. And so we're now seeing around the world people setting up services the way they should have been set up in the first place. And service users and families and progressive service providers creating new entities in which the new entity is set up properly, in which it's not a rigged game, but rather a kind of idealized sense of how service should be proceeded with. And those kinds of entities are going to proliferate. They've already begun to. Because why? Because in those kinds of entities, you have a better chance of establishing right relationship. And since relationship is very important, it's part of the product. And so you design the mechanisms that give you the kind of product you really want. And Marg had mentioned that the organization she was speaking of is an organization called Homes West. But Homes West was set up 25 years ago to be more ideal for what families were trying to achieve. In a sense, it's tailored better to what their aims were. And of course, in that, it's more possible to have respect for families at the table making decisions, and so on and so forth. So in this sense, avoiding parties that just aren't going to come to the right relationship table. That is a tough decision to make, but sometimes you don't have a chance of making it work if you have the wrong people or the wrong entities showing up. And all of this goes back to what is the bottom line and defining what the bottom line is. Now, Marg talked about it as vision, but she also, I think, means values. What are the bottom line values? Because if you're not on the same page at that level with values, it's very hard to do things further along, because you really need compatible values, not identical, but certainly compatible values. Okay, well, just a quick comment. There is quite a bit now starting to be written about these kinds of matters, and if you're interested in further reading and resources and so on, do get in touch with us, because we can refer you to some of that if any of this seemed interesting to you. And if it wasn't interesting to you, it's Mark's fault. She's just terrible at partnering, and she's always so angry. Thank you.